We are facing a digital tsunami. Technologies that are ever more powerful are fundamentally altering our business environment. All companies, universities even, we all have to adapt to this changed environment or risk being left behind. We must ride the wave or wipe out. If you think you've heard me say those words before, it's because I have. Those were my opening words to you at the first ever Road to Reinvention in 2015. I thought this would be a good time to look back at the 4 years since we launched the conference, see how far we've come, where we are today, and what the future might hold. But let's also take a moment to reflect a little more deeply. Technology is an enormous force for good, but it also holds much peril. In the last year, we've witnessed this phenomenon called Techlash. We're concerned about the ethics of AI. We're concerned about privacy. We're concerned about cybersecurity. We're concerned about the dominant power of platforms. Society as a whole has become far more wary. I believe that with responsible leadership and with the active involvement of all of us, our community, we can build a better society and a digital world that we all want to live in. So let's get started. In 2015, we said that the economy was becoming far more software driven. We got that one right. We posited that every company must become a software company. Now, we didn't mean that you stopped doing whatever it is you were doing and suddenly get into the business of writing and selling software. No, what we meant was that what you really needed to do was focus on the fact that the value creation opportunities and the competitive advantage that you could gain would come from software. Once you recognize that software is a key asset, then how you compete changes. And that's because the economics of software is very different from the economics of physical goods. You may not have believed me then, but let's think about what's happened since. In 2016, between the time of the conference in 2015 and next March, Tesla announced Autopilot. There's self-driving software, $2,500, downloadable over the air. And all of a sudden, the arms race for self-driving software was on. Traditional automakers were caught flat-footed, and they've been racing ever since to catch up. That was also the year when Google restructured itself as Alphabet, going after healthcare, going after cloud computing, going after cars, the automakers. All of a sudden, incumbents realized that disruption was far closer than they thought. In 2017, technology began to come of age. The iPhone turned 10. Companies like Netflix, Amazon, Apple, Google began pulling further and further ahead of their competitors. What's interesting is that research now shows that companies that invest in proprietary software, the software that distinguishes us, actually allows us to compete better, allows us to win. What do I mean by that? What I mean is you need to take the know-how that you have that is unique to you, what makes your company different, what you know how to do that nobody else knows how to do. You need to codify that into software platforms. Once you've done that, you can leverage that and get a lead. Once you get the lead, and you get the lead by achieving higher levels of productivity. Once you improve your productivity, you can grab market share, you become bigger, and then you leverage your scale to get even more productive and bigger still. The Washington Post is a really good example of a company that has done that. When they became far more of an online newspaper, they changed their strategy to go from a local newspaper to a national newspaper. But then they found that they didn't have any of the tools that are necessary for an online paper. So for example, how to release articles in a continuous flow, how to design a paywall. All of these things that companies now take for granted, those tools didn't exist back then. And the next thing you know is they've launched their own company selling the tools that they built for in-house advantage. The Washington Post is a software company. So the lead got bigger and bigger and bigger with the companies that were winning. And it became imperative that incumbent firms were hurrying to catch up, because once you get left behind, it becomes awfully difficult. In 2018, there was a change in sentiment. The rules of the game had shifted. The platforms had become extremely powerful. It was no longer a question of how are you going to beat your competitors, your traditional competitors. It was how are you going to beat the Googles and the Apples and the Amazons if they entered your space. So for example, Apple launched Apple Music 7 years after Spotify. And last year, they grew faster than Spotify in the United States. It's very, very difficult to compete against the platforms because of the advantages that are inherent to their market position. Competition is really important to innovation. And this is one of the things that we have to think about today, which is how do we build a playing field that is more competitive, more open to innovation. We also featured a lot of companies at this conference. In 2015, we featured Walmart talking about e-commerce. In 2015, Walmart was actually doing quite well as a company, but I don't think they would be terribly angry at me if I said they were struggling in e-commerce. Amazon was all we seemed to talk about, and Walmart was struggling in e-commerce. In 2016, they bought Jet.com and got Mark Lowry as part of the deal. And that was, I think, when they found their groove. If you think about the advantages that Walmart brings to the table, it's got 5,000 stores. 90% of all Americans live within a Walmart location. We've moved to a world of online delivery and curbside pickup. Walmart is able to fulfill on both of those promises relatively easily because of their 5,000 locations. They are leveraging their existing assets as a result of what they have. Now, it's important to remember that every store at Walmart already makes money. So now you are repurposing these stores for another value-added use. How do they pull that off? They've got shoppers. I don't know if you know this, but shoppers actually shop for 8 of us at the same time. The problem has become so large that they are now redesigning the store so that shoppers like you and I who are in Walmart shopping for ourselves actually don't keep running into the professional shoppers at Walmart. They use robotics, these little robots that you can see here that scan the shelves to figure out which items are missing. And as you all know, Walmart's been tremendous at supply chain for a very, very long time. So these robots now tell the stockers, hey, we're out of product here, you better restock quickly, change what it is you're doing. All of this has resulted in Walmart e-commerce growing at 40% per year. Mark Lowry has introduced a culture of innovation, of risk-taking, of experimentation. They have an innovation center called Store 8. All of this has put them firmly back on the map of omnichannel, for example. So here's a company that from 2015 to 2019 has really reinvented itself. Here's a slightly different story. I remember back in 2016 when we featured the CEO of GE Digital, we couldn't at the center have been more excited about what was going on. It was all we could talk about in our classes. Here was a company that told the story of industrialization, of an industrial company becoming digital. They used language like, we want to be the premier digital industrial company. We want to be a top 10 software company. They introduced the concept of the digital twin, which every company who's in manufacturing now talks about. They introduced the analytics and IoT. This is what predictive analytics, this is what company after company after company is doing. They launched a software center of excellence, which they ultimately renamed GE Digital. and they wanted to build this platform called Predix. Unfortunately, there were some wild cards. They made an acquisition in the power division that didn't pan out. They had some trouble with GE Capital, lots of financial pressure, which forced them to change their strategy. But GE Digital is now an independently owned subsidiary of GE, servicing commercial clients. I will say one thing about sort of what their strategy and vision, I think, were right on, were spot on. I think the challenges that they had were around execution and implementation. One of the questions that we all have to ask ourselves is, what is the path to scale and what is the path to profitability? GE's vision was so ambitious that the intermediate milestones became harder and harder to achieve because they were setting out on this grand vision. Now what they're doing is focusing on sort of the more immediate needs of their customers. Becoming a software company is really hard. In 2017, we featured Lyft. This story, every time I think about it, blows me away. 7 years ago, none of us had heard the term the sharing economy. We didn't know what that was. In 7 years, they are IPOing at an estimated market cap of $20 to $23 billion. They're still losing money, but people are betting on the future. If you think that's excessive, Uber is $120 billion, supposedly going public anytime soon. This is a really powerful story because whether the market cap is justified or not, it really shows us the way in which these new software-powered businesses are reconfiguring the way services are delivered, reconfiguring who owns the assets, and is able to deliver a service that we all want. 2 years ago, when Lyft was on this stage, we weren't even sure they were going to make it. Because Uber was the dominant competitor. They have thrived since. Traffic is up, profits are not there yet, but losses are shrinking. And in 2018, just last year, we featured Microsoft. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella talks about this concept called tech intensity. They believe that it is their responsibility to make every one of their customers a world-class software creator. We love that because it is completely consistent with what we've been saying. But what they further believe is that it is their responsibility to deliver the products and services that will allow you and me to become world-class software creators. So they will provide you with all the cloud platforms, hardware and software that you need. We, like I said before, have to talk about the things that we are good at doing, the things that are unique to us, the things that differentiate us, codify those into software, and scale those. That's what they called tech capability. So success is driven by a marriage between the tech adoption that you get from technology providers and the capability that you bring to the table in terms of the value that your company adds. Microsoft is riding the wave better than most companies. They are now the #1 market cap company again. The last time they were here was 2003, and people didn't think that they would ever achieve their dominance. It also means that the Gates Foundation has a lot more money to give, which is a good thing. I call this my DNA slide. So while we've sort of focused on the strategic importance of software, we think every company must think like a software company. If you think about DNA is what defines us. It makes us who we are, what we do. It sort of it really represents who we are. I think code today is the DNA of a company. It tells us how to operate. It figures out, it is what differentiates us. The one big difference is that you can rewrite your own code that we cannot do yet in living beings. So we really need to think about what this means and how we can all lead and win in our businesses by thinking like a software company. So let's take a bunch of examples of companies that are all going to be here today that are actually leveraging software in their businesses. This is Ulta Beauty, who's going to speak in a few minutes. Today, they use augmented reality on their app. Now, I can't really say that I've tried this product, but I'm sure many of you have. And my wife tells me that it's very difficult to try makeup on in a store, or even if you're trying it at home. You're trying a lot of different combinations, and it's not easy, and you're worried about hygiene, and you're worried about a lot of other things. You can do this on your app using augmented reality at home, and you don't really have to do very much. Now, here's the interesting thing. Ulta Beauty bought a company called Glam Street to do this. They've also bought an artificial intelligence company, and Mary Dillon will tell us that they had never, ever bought a tech company before. That's what I mean by lead with software. We all have to think about software companies. Software is now in Ulta Beauty's DNA. Now, you might be wondering what McLaren is doing on a slide with a train in Singapore. And we're going to have a McLaren car outside in a few minutes. McLaren, as you all know, is a Formula One car racing company. They've used IoT and analytics and sensors for years. In a Formula One race, which is a couple of 100 miles, you win by seconds. Seconds in a race that is that long. Their pit crew is no longer the guys who come running out and change your wheels. It's the data scientists in their control room that are telling the driver how to drive. Well, they figured out that the same technology, streaming computing and the analytics that they use on streaming data, is what is relevant to a whole range of other companies and industries. So Singapore Railroad is one, because as you can imagine, you put sensors on these trains, and all of a sudden you can optimize sort of the way they operate. They're doing it in pharma and a variety of other sectors as well. They are leveraging the software that they develop in one domain. They've launched a company called McLaren Applied Technologies that now sells these services to a variety of other industries. Let's talk about food. I want you to think about this the next time you eat a tiramisu. The tiramisu has traveled 41,000 miles to get to your table. You add up the miles of all of the ingredients in your tiramisu. You can eat tomatoes all year long, you can eat berries all year long, but what that has done is complicated the supply chain, because now we have a global supply chain. You might remember the spinach E. coli outbreak. Unfortunately, a lot of people died, but lots and lots of spinach was taken off the shelves. So every grocer, everybody who had spinach in their warehouses had to get rid of their spinach. When they finally diagnosed the problem, it was one supplier, one farm, 1 day production, one lot. And we wiped out millions and millions of dollars of inventory costs associated with that. IBM is working with Kroger and Carrefour and Walmart and Dole and Golden State Foods and a whole bunch of other providers to build a blockchain, a permissioned blockchain for the food supply chain. We need trust in the supply chain. Trust requires transparency, and a permissioned blockchain allows you to achieve that. A few years ago, we weren't even sure blockchain was going to survive. Now what we're finding is that there's any number of uses for blockchain. And then there's Taco Bell. I've spent years talking to the folks at Taco Bell, and one of the things that they are very, very good at is getting your food quickly. In fact, they belong to an industry sector called QSR, quick service restaurants. And their focus has always been getting you in and out of the restaurant as quickly as possible, especially through the drive-thru. That is where they have spent a lot of resources. Well, guess what? That's not good enough anymore, because now we want a taco at home on our couch while we watch the Super Bowl. as the saying goes, never bet against a lazy American on a couch. Very profound statement there. So now you have the challenge of how do you get food from a restaurant to somebody's home quickly without spoiling the quality and the crispiness of the taco, for example. They considered a variety of options to do this and ultimately chose to partner with the leading sharing economy delivery platform, Grubhub. But they didn't just say list us as one of the vendors on your platform. They made a strategic investment of $200 million into Grubhub, and we'll talk much more about that. But we are pushing the boundaries of what is possible with technology. And then there's Acorns, which is actually on University Research Park on our campus right here. Now you would find it hard to believe that there was that there is sort of an underserved market for savings and for products and savings in the US, but there is, because young people, initially at least, don't have a lot of money. They don't really want to think very hard about saving, and people like me who've thought about it for a long time still get confused about the right investment strategies. And here comes Acorns and simply says, well, if you like Starbucks, you spend $3.50 on a latte, why don't you take the other 50 cents and put it into an investment account? And by the way, we've got a Nobel laureate, Harry Markowitz, who's designed 5 portfolios for us, all the way from least risky to most risky. Just pick one of the 5 that works with your risk profile. Give us $1 a month, and we'll do the rest. Think about that. On the one hand, it sounds incredibly simple. On the other hand, it's extraordinarily valuable because all of a sudden we are preparing people for retirement, which is a huge burden off of society. You know, my own point of view is it's less important what investment portfolio you pick. It's far more important that you start saving when you're 20 years old. I think that is the message. And they are now at over 4 million customers. They're one of the latest unicorns, huge market cap, underserved market, a fantastic, fantastic software platform. And then, of course, Adobe. We all know Adobe is the creator of Photoshop, Illustrator, Premiere Pro, fantastic products for creative types. Photoshop, which when I was in Rochester in grad school, we were not allowed to say the word Xerox as an adjective or a verb, and now Photoshop is a verb, right? It's that successful, but it was $1,900 to buy a copy of Photoshop off the shelf. You couldn't be a creator or a creative type if you didn't know how to use Adobe products. They've always been world-class at these products. But then the cloud hits. And in 2011, Mr. Narayan, who we'll hear from next, decides to embrace the cloud. Now think about the courage it takes to go from a $1,900 product to a $50 a month product, which means it takes roughly 3 years to make $1,900 off that one customer. And then you're changing your entire philosophy for delivery because now you're releasing enhancements on a far more frequent basis than you ever did. But it reduced the barriers to entry. And all of a sudden, a lot of people could engage with the products in a way that they couldn't before. And then mobile hit. And then they started thinking and said, well, why does a creator need to be tethered at his or her desk? Why can't they create on the mobile platform? Now they're thinking about voice. And then AI comes in. And now they have a product called Adobe Sensei, which is really interesting because, you know, we think about creative as being this right brain stuff, which it, for the most part, is. But there's a huge routine piece to creativity. You've got to search for images. You've got to sort of enhance your images. There's a lot of stuff that you do day to day that is not very creative, even though you are a creative professional. This is a picture of Dubai enhanced by Adobe Sensei that began in a with a very different appearance. Adobe is another master surfer. They are riding the wave better than most companies I know. Let's switch gears a little bit to talk about technology. 6G. Last week, you might be thinking, why the heck is he talking about 6G? We just got 5G last week. You know, all the telecom providers start talking about 5G. Well, if you talk to the scientists and the researchers and the standards organizations, they're already on to 6G. And the reason 6G is important is because it gives you higher bandwidth, it gives you much quicker response times, and most importantly, it allows you to have much higher density. So you can have many more devices per square mile. If you think about self-driving cars, this is what you need. You cannot do self-driving cars the way we want to do it with 5G. So this is really important. And then, of course, quantum computing. All you need to know about quantum computing for now is it's a few years away, but every major hardware manufacturer is thinking about this. You put computing and you put communications together, and all of a sudden, new magical things become possible. So that leads me to the very interesting question, which is, where will the tsunami hit next? And I'm going to tell you that the tsunami hits next in traditional industries, in healthcare and education, all the knowledge-based industries. So let's talk about that. In the last 6 years, we have seen an amazing set of improvements in machine learning. It's an order of magnitude better than we could have probably hoped for. New knowledge is no longer going to be restricted to the domain of humans conceiving of theories. It's going to be data-driven models driven by machine learning systems. So it's only a matter of time when machines can outthink humans. We're not quite there yet, but don't be surprised when this happens. So the question for us right now is, what do we do in a world where know-how is being created by machines, may not be perfect yet? So let me give you an example of protein folding. Most of you probably don't know what it is. I didn't know what it was until a short while ago, too. This is a very important problem in medicine. The world's best biologists get together every couple of years to predict they have a competition where they use their algorithms to predict the 3D structure of a protein based on its genetic sequence alone. So you've got 12 years of this competition, almost a quarter century. World's best scientists get together and they're advancing the state of the art, and every year a new team wins. This year they go, and to their rude surprise, or their rude shock, I should say, DeepMind, Alphabet's division out of London, wins. And they're all completely shocked, thinking, where the heck did these guys come from? This protein folding problem is crucial to the development of new drugs for Alzheimer's, for Parkinson's, things like that. Now, it's understandable that the universities couldn't keep up, simply because they don't have the money and the resources that a DeepMind has. But now you've got pharma companies that are spending millions and millions of dollars in R&D. They've got the world's best scientists, and they're not able to keep up with DeepMind. What I should have also said was DeepMind won by a bigger amount from the previous competition than had ever been done before. So if you're a pharma company, you should be terribly afraid of being disrupted. Now, if your defense is machine learning is not your core competence, my question to you would be, why not? So let's take an example of a product that's here today that relies heavily on knowledge, self-driving. This is Waymo. They have the most advanced self-driving software in the world. They have 10 million miles of driving experience. It is the world's most experienced driver. They have 7 billion miles on the simulator. And the question becomes, how do you get this technology to market? Right now, they are partnering with Renault, Mitsubishi, and Nissan to get their software into cars. And their service that parallels Uber and Lyft is this thing called Waymo One, which is currently being tested in Chandler, Arizona. They have a few hundred customers that they've led onto the platform. And this is probably 10 years since Google launched self-driving. How many companies have the resources to keep funding an initiative like this without making a dime off this initiative? So how might we get this technology to market? Let's take another approach. Rather than try and make the technology better than ever, perhaps there's another approach where we simply say, what's the technology good at? Can we set some boundaries around this? There's a company called Voyage, which tries to do this. So they looked for retirement communities where the speed limit is 25 miles or less. So here's the thing. The biggest problem with having self-driving cars go fast is you need very expensive LiDAR equipment. LiDAR for cars that go at 25 miles an hour because they don't need to see that far ahead is much cheaper. And there's more to it than that, but that's sort of a reasonable approximation. So if you find a community that's got hundreds of thousands of residents, thousands of miles of roads, and people who really need help getting around, that's where they've launched. Now, I'm not saying bet on Voyage or bet on Waymo, but what I'm saying is knowledge is just one piece of the equation. The other piece of it is how do you get your technology to market and what is the business model by which you're going to get there. So who will win? There's an intangible factor. Technology is abundant, but you never win on an abundant resource. What you actually win on is a scarce resource. And the scarce resource these days is sort of what technology should I invest in? What problem should I solve? What innovation should I prioritize? Can I digitize all my processes so that I can actually take advantage of AI? All of these things, and a vision for how all of this comes together in the future. There is always an intangible asset that drives the value that we get from the physical assets that we use in our businesses every day. I'm so delighted that all of you are here because one of the things we all need to do is acquire this know-how so that we can lead our companies to success. Now, most technology markets are winner-take-all, largely because there's economies of scale, there's network effects, data is not portable, but it doesn't have to be that way. We need to design a regulatory and competitive regime that actually encourages competition because competition breeds innovation. So when we build this future, we want to make sure that we continue to be innovative and not get locked into a specific situation. This can be done, and Britain, for example, has just released a report talking about the regulatory regime for tech companies. But technology can also, as I said when I opened, be a source of problems. The technologies that solve our problems are also the ones that sometimes create new ones. This is the one that's been in the newspaper every single day. This is the 737 MAX 8 and the MAX 9. And it turns out that the interface between us and the machine, when code's involved, it gets very complicated. Now, there's a faulty sensor. The software actually sort of worked fine, but when the sensor gave it false, bad data, it kept trying to get the plane to put its nose down, and the nose was never up to begin with, and so ultimately, and this happened 24 times, by the way. The pilots kept reversing it 24 times, and ultimately the plane crashes into the ocean, which is obviously a huge tragedy. All of us work at companies where software is increasingly mission critical. Now, hopefully, not all of us work in companies where so it's life and death situations, but this is something that we all need to think about. Society has increasingly gone on autopilot. You don't think about this on a day-to-day basis, but the books you read, the movies you watch, the people you date, the restaurants you eat at are all determined for you, or at least influenced by code. And we have to ask ourselves the question, is this a society that we want? Now, for things like books and movies, it's not the end of the world. You can turn it off, you can find something else. But we're also using it to determine what the jail sentence should be for a criminal, because they're using software to determine if he or she, usually a he, is going to commit a crime again. And we don't really know sort of what is in these systems. We've learned over the last few years the systems can be horribly biased. It depends on sort of the input data that you give it. These are things that need to have light shine on them so we can do better with them. This is will.i.am, the front man for the Black Eyed Peas. So he has a really interesting point of view that he wrote in The Economist, which basically said this: if I write a song, I can make a lot of money off my music. But if my data is being monetized by all kinds of people except me. What is the difference between my data that I generate and a song that I write? And I thought it was a very profound question, because right now we have this model where our data, we are the raw material for many of these platforms. So think a little bit further. where the issue is this. Right now, your Apple Watch tracks your heart rate, but we don't really know a lot about other things. What did we eat today? What's my blood pressure? Whatever factors, what's my A1C? Whatever these factors are that you want to track. If you want to build a system that is really useful to us, we have to link all of this data and make recommendations to the individual about what interventions we might need. We're not going to get there if we don't have trust in the platforms and we don't have trust in the data. The really valuable systems will happen when we can trust the system. So we must rethink the system design. Some people call this surveillance capitalism, where it's a capitalism that resides on the data that is derived by watching people. But I think we can do better. We can design a system where it works for everybody. This is from the Michelob commercial at the Super Bowl. And they show this robot outperforming humans at every sport. But then the couple goes into a bar and has a Michelob. And the robot is looking forlornly in from the outside because A, it shows our angst with robots, but B, it's like robots aren't human. And I want to remind everybody, it goes back to science fiction writer Isaac Asimov's rules or laws of robotics. Robots should be about serving humans. They should not be about efficiency without thinking about the consequences. Stanford just launched an institute this week on sort of the human, it's called human-centered artificial intelligence. Those are the kinds of conversations we need to be having every single day. I want to close with this. We must put people first. This is Aravinda Hospital. It's in a city in South India called Madurai, and they use Google's division Verily's software to detect diabetic retinopathy by looking at people's retinal scans. What's powerful about this is India has a huge problem with diabetes, which means a lot of people are going blind with diabetic retinopathy, but it does not have the doctors to screen people's retinas. Isn't this wonderful? Where we have a system that does the work of humans that don't currently do the work today. So rather than focus on job loss, which is how this debate has been framed, I would much rather focus on what is possible. How can we help mankind? How do we solve a real problem where we don't have the workers that we need today? I want to leave you with technology is incredibly powerful. Let's build a world we can be proud of. Let's build a world that we want to live in. Thank you so much for your attention.